Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Omar Khalid, but today is the 20th of December 2023. 10 days are left around before the year comes to an end. But when it comes to the atrocities on the Palestinians, that is nowhere coming to an end anytime soon as far as the different details are coming, and that is going to be our first segment today. Day 75 of the conflict between Israel and Palestine. There is a United Nations Security Council vote calling for a pause in the Israel-Hamas war. It has again been postponed. It was this vote was to be held yesterday. It has been postponed again to be held today. Let's see if there is a suspension of hostilities from the Israeli side as a result of this or not, or will there be again a veto by the powers that be. The US voters also, coming to the US voters are also broadly disapproving of the way President Biden is handling the war in Gaza as the conflict grinds into its third month. 75 days is a huge number of days. Israel is also facing mounting international pressure over the rising civilian death toll and the destructions of the hospitals in Gaza. But the Pentagon chief says US will continue to provide arms to Israel. At the same time, there are talks of truce between Israel and Palestine. There's a meeting that is being held in Cairo with Egyptian officials, the Palestinian side, the Israeli side as well, to see how things can board along. Will it prove to be beneficial or not? That only remains to be seen, but that will be also part of this segment. This is going to be our first story. Then we are going to talk about, ladies and gentlemen, the World Bank loan to Pakistan. The World Bank has approved 350 million financing for a Rise 2 operation, that is a resilient institutions for sustainable economy operation in Pakistan. And of course, this aims to strengthen fiscal management and promote competitiveness for sustained and inclusive economic growth in the country. A welcome step, and let's see how this goes along as far as this and other macroeconomic indicators for the country's economic progress is concerned. Then we are going to talk about Donald Trump, who has been disqualified from Colorado's presidential primary ballot by the state's Supreme Court. What does it mean for the former US president? Does it mean that there is going to be increased pressure on him not to contest? Will he not contest, or can he still contest from other states? That will be part of our today's lineup as well. And then finally, we're going to talk about the International Human Solidarity Day, ladies and gentlemen, that is being observed across the world, including in Pakistan. This year, of course, the theme of this day is advocate for change. When you look at what is happening in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and Palestine, I think change is the key word that needs to happen, and advocacy is also something that is required by the important powers that be. This is going to be our last story. Let's begin with our first, and that concerns day 75 of the conflict between Israel and Palestine. Day 75 of the continued brutalities by Israel on the hapless Palestinians. Day 75 of the people being murdered, of the people being denied their due rights in hospitals, otherwise food, water, electricity, fuel, and the internet, and so on and so forth. The list goes on and on. People are dying because they do not have access to medicine. People are dying because they don't have access to clean water. This and more is going to be discussed in our first segment. And our guest in the studios who joins us is Jauhar Saleem. He is a former foreign secretary and an analyst as far as foreign affairs is concerned. Thank you very much, Jauhar Saleem Saab, to have joined us. We'll also be joined, ladies and gentlemen, online by Hammad Sarfraz. He's a senior journalist. Let's begin with you, Jauhar Saleem Saab. Jauhar Saleem Saab, when it comes to this conflict, let's begin with what is happening right now, the talks for truce between the Palestinian and the Israeli side. Should we be optimistic?
I think at this point in time, what we see is it's very intense back-channel diplomacy going on. On the one hand, what we see is in Egypt, as we speak, Ismail Haniyeh is there. He's negotiating through the Egyptian intelligence chief with the Israelis and other parties involved. And basically, they are trying to have another humanitarian pause. So that's one side. On the other side, in the UN, again, there's intense discussion and intense diplomacy going on. And that is for a draft resolution, which was supposed to be voted upon yesterday, but they couldn't. And why they couldn't? Because they don't want the US to veto it again. It's very interesting because the language changes which are being
proposed by the US
there, because originally the UAE, the resolution called for an urgent cessation of hostilities, and then there was a word sustainable as well. I think, in the next sentence. So basically, that was sort of, close to a ceasefire. But because the word secession is linked with cease, and that is why they don't really want it. So they propose to change it to suspension of hostilities.
But Jauhar, Saleem sir, why so? Why can't they just agree on the word ceasefire? What is the irregularity or the complexity of using the word ceasefire?
No, it's actually very important. It's a very critical distinction, because you see, a ceasefire means that happens for a certain bit of time. In fact, a ceasefire can be permanent as well. Between Pakistan and India, we have had ceasefires which lasted for years, and and still we still have one. And that is something the Israelis think and the Americans think, that a ceasefire would basically help the other side, because that's exactly what they need, a breathing space to reorganize, rebuild them. And that's their perception. On the other hand, what the Israelis want, they want what they call the humanitarian pauses every now and then, but negotiated ones, so that every time they give them a few days, like the last time they did.
In exchange of prisoners, basically.
Exactly, in exchange for the hostages. So by doing so, they want more and more hostages, because that, they think, would take the trump card out of the hands of the Hamas there. So that is why this becomes crucially important. Now, Americans have made it very clear that, I think I'd mentioned it in my last comments as well, that whenever there's talk of a permanent ceasefire, the Americans would veto that, regardless of whatever the mounting pressure may be outside or inside America. You talked about the younger people. Yes, they are generally, Biden is generally unpopular now in America amongst the young voters, which is surprising, because those are the voters which brought him to power in the first place, the Democrats. But right now, the youngsters are turning away from that. And this policy, the policy of sort of, unconditionally supporting Israel, even though they have brutally killed 20,000 people there, and most of which are women and children. So that is making him even more unpopular. But despite that, I can tell you that in my view, the Americans would still not support a ceasefire or anything close to a ceasefire. They would still only go for a resolution which would call for a suspension or basically a humanitarian pause or something like that, which would be something very temporary, because that is exactly what suits the Israeli strategy of war there. And this war, as many analysts have termed it now, and as I had termed it before, this war, unfortunately, is about Netanyahu's political future.
Exactly.
And I had said it many times before, that Netanyahu is the type of person who would not care whatever comes in his way.
Because his political, future is at stake.
I mean, there are people who resign in these type of situations, but he's not the type of person. He would probably, you see, after so many killings, after 20,000 people having been...
I mean, a person who had any kind of sanity would have resigned by now. I will have to now revert to my second guest, Hammad Sarfraz, senior journalist, joins us online. Hammad, thank you very much to have joined us. Hammad, we were just discussing, the truce talks for which are happening in Egypt as we speak, between the Palestinian side and, of course, different other sides as well. At the same time, talks between Mossad, CIA and the Qatari Prime Minister in Warsaw have also happened, that apparently have been positive and might lead to some kind of a truce between both the sides. Is it truce that benefits the Palestinian side? Is it ceasefire that benefits the Palestinian side? And what is the kind of event that you foresee through the United Nations and through these talks?
Thank you, Omar. I think day 75, and we're still talking about a truce. We're still talking about the possibility of ending this massacre of Palestinian people. I mean, that itself tells you a great deal about what's happening. We've seen an earlier UN resolution was vetoed by the US. I don't see much happening this time. The US is not committed to protecting the Palestinians. We've seen that historically. We've seen that through several presidents, all the way from Carter onwards. And there's no real commitment from the US to the two-state solution or even peace for this troubled region. And without that, I don't see anything concrete happening in the long term.
All right, but Hammad, this said, don't you feel this is going to affect the basic American politics as per se, because the elections are going to be held in 2024, and as far as the latest poll is concerned, President Biden's support of Israel's war in Gaza is not popular with younger voters. I'd like to just give you some statistics. 72% of registered voters aged 18 to 29 disapprove of Biden's handling of the war, and Trump holds a 6-point lead over Biden among registered voters in the demographic. Don't you feel the Democrats understand the gravity of the situation, how it's going to affect them in the elections next year?
I think it's too late to think about what it might do to Biden, because as we look at the situation, this appears to be Biden's personal view of the Middle East that is sort of becoming a hurdle in him doing anything for that region. Many of the State Department officials, including people in the White House, have forced the president to act. But the president chooses to act in private, as he did at a donor event earlier. But, you know, his words and his actions, there's a lot of contradiction in what the president says in private and what the president actually does. So I think the damage is already done. I don't see that whatever Biden might do now would help him sort of secure any victory at home with the younger voters, especially. Because he's very unpopular right now, given the visuals that are coming out from that region. So I think we should keep that in mind.
All right. What happens then to the draft resolution that might be passed today by the United Nations or might not be passed?
I'm honestly not very hopeful. I think, what we're seeing right now is the collapse of the international system. And does the UN have any power or authority to implement things? I mean, that's another question that I want to sort of, look at and see in the future. Can Netanyahu be forced to accept anything? Because as my fellow panelists said earlier, that this is all about Netanyahu's political survival. Because as we know, before this crisis, Netanyahu was facing a terrible political crisis at home. And by now, I think he should have been out. So I think October 7th was a lifeline, a political lifeline for him. And I don't think he will give up on it.
All right. He will not give up on this lifeline. Jauhar Saleem Saab, the ILO says that Palestinians in Gaza will be in poverty for many months and years to come because of this war. Whenever this war ends, I mean, we don't know at this moment because it's very skeptical, it's all in the air. But whenever it does end, what is the immediate future as far as Palestine and the Palestinians are concerned? Because already there is such a huge number that has been displaced, around 1.9 million to other parts of Palestine. What happens to those people? What happens to Gaza?
It's a tragedy. Even before this war, the situation there was unbearable in economic terms. So they don't really have any economy to speak of. It was basically, Gaza was totally dependent on foreign assistance. And, like in that type of a situation, and even before this, the unemployment rate amongst the youth there was over 50%. Now it has jumped to 70%. The thing is, you cannot run a country like that, unfortunately. You cannot run it's not even a country, not even a state. It's was an autonomous region. Now Israelis are trying to basically wrest it back. And I think at this point in time, you cannot even think of having a sustainable and particularly self-sustainable economy there. For a long time to come, Gaza would be dependent upon foreign assistance. I mean, the Israelis themselves have said that once this is over, they will rebuild it.
And not only will they rebuild it, they are also saying that they will be, controlling it militarily.
Yeah, that's the other thing they've said. So basically, what we can envisage is that in times to come, the Israelis, and of course, there would be probably a lot of other foreign assistance coming from the Arab countries, from the international humanitarian bodies.
Another question is whether it will reach or not in time.
Well, I'm talking about this situation of the day after,
of course,
in whatever shape this present conflict, which is causing so much suffering for the Palestinians. Once it finishes, then that's what we will see. Before that, I think the draft resolution that they're discussing in the United Nations right now, it is also about not just about cessation or suspension of whatever the eventual shape of that draft resolution is. And my feeling on that is that they might eventually come up with a language that the Americans may approve of.
All right.
And if that doesn't happen, if the language is not acceptable to the Americans, they would again veto it. But the other segment of the debate there, or the discussions there, is about unhindered flow of humanitarian assistance to Gaza. And for that also some language is, they're trying to agree upon some language. The Israelis are not very, of course, you know, they're not very helpful. If anything, they're the biggest stumbling block in it. But I think because of the international pressure that we are seeing, probably some sort of a mechanism would have to be found.
All right. So some kind of a mechanism needs to be found, or might be formed or found. Hammad, finally, I'd like to understand, children in Gaza, as far as the UNICEF report is concerned, access only 10% of water that is needed just for survival. They say the sanitation and water services are at the point of collapse in Gaza, with large-scale disease outbreaks looming. Then we've got all the attacks on the hospitals and the situation in the hospitals as well. We've discussed that in the past with the guests as well, but you understand the current situation in the hospitals is also not, in a proper shape for all these children, for the elderly, for those women who need help desperately. Also with the fact that not proper water and food and other medicine is not arriving in time, and that is also causing huge problems. Do you feel even if the war ends, Hammad, in the next couple of days, is a truce, what are the long-term effects that the Palestinians are going to suffer from in the months and the years to come? And I'm talking with respect to disease, with respect to health, and respect to the children of Palestine.
Omar, let's not make any mistake about the fact that this is a catastrophic humanitarian crisis, and we are there already. And it's getting, it goes down further every hour, every minute. I mean, we started off talking about this territory, calling it the world's largest open-air prison. And we've moved on to calling it the world's largest genocide, which is unfolding before us, and it's being televised. I mean, when you see all of this in front of you, I really worry for the generation or the people or the kids in Palestine. And how will they even get around this, if they ever do? I don't see it coming. I don't see anything good coming out of it. With such catastrophe, with such disaster, with such massive bombing, I don't see anything good coming out of it. And I see it from all the reports and the amnesties and the other aid organizations sort of commenting on it on a regular basis. This is a terrible situation, and it's not getting better for them.
All right. Thank you very much, Hammad, to have joined us. That was Hammad Sarfraz, senior journalist, joining us online. All right. Finally, the Palestinian prisoners versus the Israeli prisoners. I'd like to just give you a statistic as far as those that are in Israeli jails are concerned. 7,820 Palestinians in prison. Since the 7th of October, 4,630 Palestinians have been detained by Israeli forces. From the beginning of this year to the end of November, 9,410 arrests have been made, including 2,221 on administrative detention, which is without charge or trial. Can some mechanism, you talked of mechanisms before I shifted to the other guest, can some mechanism also be evolved for those Palestinian prisoners that are languishing without any charge whatsoever in Israeli jails?
Yeah, well, that's a very important question. I think in the past, what we saw was, you see, there have been situations in the past where only for one Israeli soldier released, about 1,000 Palestinians were released, against that. But that situation, we don't really see a replication of that situation now, because I think that is what the Hamas felt, that they could have those type of negotiations now. But unfortunately, this time, Israelis have been very, very tough. So what we see, the numbers that they got released just by having a 7 days truce and 2 days truce or whatever. Because they believe that this is one of the tactics being used. And they think the best, and like you said, they're adding up the numbers by detaining more people. They already had thousands of Palestinian prisoners, and on top of that, they're arresting more. So this is sort of a bargaining chip, in their perspective, which is very unfortunate. But I do think that whenever there's sort of like some negotiation for a sustainable cessation of hostilities, I wouldn't even call it a permanent ceasefire. whenever there's a negotiation for that, this would be a segment, because then there would be an intense negotiation for release of prisoners or hostages, from both sides. And I think that could be the make or break. Because I know that, everybody knows that, whoever has been analyzing that, that Yahya Sinwar, for example, who is now leading the militants, in the past he was imprisoned by the Israelis, and he was also released against the release of that one Israeli soldier. And he is a very tough negotiator. So it would be his best endeavor to get as many Palestinians released as possible. But now Israelis, in some ways, their analysts feel that they have learned the lesson, not to do that, not to repeat that type of thing again. So I believe that this could be crucial in terms of the negotiation of a sustainable cessation of hostilities whenever it comes.
But that is very important, because if you just look at the latest strikes, 5 strikes in Gaza, 46 people killed, dozens wounded in strikes on Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. Then there is an air raid near the Rafah hospital. And the number of Palestinians that are being killed is increasing by the every minute. Those wounded, I don't even want to go there, because that has exceeded 50,000. And then the West Bank also, therein also the Israeli forces are working together. So all hopes, I think, are A, on the truce talks that are being held in Egypt, and B, the United Nations draft resolution that might quote unquote be accepted by US after the changing as far as the nomenclature is concerned.
If I have to say, the last sentence on that, I don't pin your hopes very high on a sustainable ceasefire at this point in time.
All right.
I think these would be very sort of, small windows.
Let's remain cautiously optimistic. Thank you very much, Jauhar. Saleem Saab, kindly stay with us for a couple of minutes. Let's go to our second story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns Pakistan's economy and the World Bank that has approved $350 million of financing for the second resilience institutions for sustainable economy operation in Pakistan. This has happened, of course, yesterday. This program aims to strengthen fiscal management and promote competitiveness for sustained and inclusive economic growth. We've been joined by Ali Salman, who's a leading economist. Ali, thank you very much to have joined us. Ali, there are certain macroeconomic indicators I pointed out in my last show as well. Current account deficit, then the others, then the exports that have increased to certain countries as well. On top of that, now there is an investor confidence from the lenders as well. We've seen the IMF relationship with Pakistan, and now the World Bank that has approved this financing for Rise to operations. How do you see this in a whole spate of measures that are being taken in order to stabilize our economy?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I think we need to acknowledge and appreciate that in the short run, the government is successful in improving the macroeconomic situation. If you see the current account deficit, it has converted into a narrow margin with a surplus, and the currency situation, the exchange rate is relatively stable than in the past, although the prices have not come down as earlier expected. But I think in that context, Pakistan will, in the short to medium term, Pakistan will still need some level of balance of payment support. So we, in the context of elections, in the post-election scenario, when the new government comes in, it is expected that they will need some additional financing because of the gap. So in that context, this new financing would be helpful for meeting up that gap, although, of course, the objective of this new loan is to help a country improve upon its performance in terms of economic reforms, fiscal reforms, and business regulation. Now, I believe that most of these soft loans are driven by the balance of payment needs rather than, frankly, seriousness in the economic reforms itself. And we have seen programs like in the past, for instance, the Raise Revenue project, which is still going on, in which the expectation was that we will improve the taxation policies, but unfortunately just loans do not help the reforms. So I think we need to take it with this view that while it will be helpful for meeting some gaps in terms of external funding, I'm not sure if it will be enough as an incentive to force Pakistani government for reforms.
All right. I understand that you talk about, this is going to, this is not going to help the reforms. But when you look at the statement that has come from the World Bank post these financing, it talks about fostering growth, competitiveness in Pakistan by reducing the cost of tax compliance, improving financial sector transparency, encouraging the use of digital payments, promoting exports by lowering import tariffs. These are 4 points that the World Bank has said in its statements while giving this a soft loan for the rise to operation. Do you feel it is linked to this current government, or it is also linked to the post-election scenario?
Well, in general, Umar, these are all important points, and I agree with all the reforms needed as repeated by you, as mentioned in the World Bank statement, and these are the measures which we need to take. I have no doubt in that, including the import tariff reforms, taxation reforms. However, if you ask my honest opinion, I'll tell you that we don't need loans to undertake these reforms. And sometimes such loans in the name of reforms can become an obstacle in reforms because it will give us some time maybe to readjust with new realities. So whether it is caretaker government or it is the next government, ultimately we need a stable political elected credible government and with a long-term view. And only that government, I think, will be able to provide a stable policy environment with strong commitment to reforms. I do not think that we need new loans because Pakistan is already under a debt sustainability crisis. So I think we need to approach such transactions with care and see and only undertake those loans which have positive return on the transaction.
All right. Thank you very much, Ali Salman, leading economist, joining us and giving us more details as far as this World Bank's soft loan of $350 million is concerned. That has been given in financing to support fiscal competitive reforms in Pakistan. Thank you very much, Ali, to have joined us. Let's now come to our third segment, and our third story concerns the United States of America and how the Supreme Court in Colorado, one of the U.S. states, has disqualified Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, from the 2024 ballot. We all know that the presidential elections are going to be held next year in the United States of America. Donald Trump says he's going to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn the decision. The ruling says that it was Trump's January 6 actions that constituted insurrection. To talk more about this, we've been joined by two guests. Let me introduce them to you one by one. We've been joined by Raza Ahmad Rumi, he's a senior journalist, and Mark Meirowitz, who is a political analyst. Let's begin with Mark Meirowitz. I hope I spell your name right, Mark. And welcome to our show. This is our first interaction. So welcome to Newsroom. Mark, I'd like to understand what are the implications of the disqualification of Donald Trump by the Colorado Supreme Court? Can, as the Republicans say, it can be contested, and will there be an overturning of this decision if this is contested?
Well, a lot has to do with the timing. The decision is an outlier in the sense that this is uncharted territory. Even the judges in the Supreme Court in Colorado said so. It's a 4-3 decision, so it was a kind of a close call. But the implications are very, very powerful because if it goes to the Supreme Court, which it will, Trump has said he's going to appeal it, and the Supreme Court upholds this, which I believe is unlikely and virtually impossible, and I'll say why in a moment. If they did, that would have implications across the various states because it is the states in the United States that run and make the rules for federal elections, not the federal government. So if it turned out that the Supreme Court said, yes, President Trump is disqualified from being on a ballot in a state, and then all the other states adopt that idea because that's the Supreme Court decision, that would be quite a mortal issue for Trump's campaign. Bottom line is here that this provision based on the reading of it, and that's the legal issue. In the 14th Amendment, Section 3, the Constitution says that you can't be a senator, representative, elector, vice president. Notice no reference to a president if you have engaged in insurrection. The purpose of this amendment was to deal with Confederates who had fought against the Union in the Civil War. This has really never been applied. Furthermore, Trump has never been convicted of insurrection, and to my knowledge, I don't think in any of the cases that have been brought has he ever been charged with insurrection. Bottom line is, the American people are entitled to vote for candidates of their choice, and if the courts take the candidates off the ballot, then they're really depriving the people of their opportunity to vote in the election. So that's really a question of election interference. So first threshold point, will the Supreme Court take the case? Secondly, when will they take the case? That will be way down the road. Trump will still be on the ballot. And then down the road comes the question of whether he actually would be disqualified and he'd be taken off the ballot. Can you imagine the chaos and interference with the American election system?
But you know, Mark, we already remember what happened on the 6th of January and what ensued, and the way this was also a first as far as the US political structure was concerned. Do you feel the repercussions will be severe following this ruling? What are your, what is your take as far as what is going to happen as far as this ruling is concerned in the coming days? Trump's campaign calls the court decision undemocratic. Is it, in fact, undemocratic?
The truth of the matter is that there won't be an appeal until about January 4th, which means that Trump will still be on the Colorado ballot. What is wrong with this decision, I think, there are a number of things. Number one, he was never convicted of insurrection. Apparently what the court is relying on is the January 6th Congressional Committee, which accused Trump of insurrection. Furthermore, the provision in the Constitution does not mention the president. And furthermore, the argument is that who can enforce this? Can the courts enforce it? Or should Congress enforce it? So this is a gigantic question. And even if it got to the Supreme Court, you have 6 conservative judges, 3 of which, by the way, Trump nominated for the Supreme Court. So it's unlikely that this will reach a disqualification. And again, I think what it rests on is the January 6th Congressional Committee, which is not a conviction in a court. And secondly, the provision itself doesn't mention the President of the United States. So I think that, again, and here is the bottom line for Trump, Trump's argument has been, well, you know, they're out to push me off the ballot, they're out to get me, they're out to target me. This gives more grist for that mill, because here's a case brought by some people in Colorado to kick a presidential candidate off a ballot, thus depriving the American people of the opportunity to vote. And that's, I think, going to be the linchpin of it. And I don't think the Supreme Court is going to enforce this provision against Trump and kick him off the ballot and take responsibility for interfering in the political system. I don't think so. I think this is a loser in terms of the Colorado Supreme Court. I think it's going to be overturned.
All right. Now, let's talk of Colorado as well. You know, the Republicans never had a very strong hold as far as Colorado is concerned. There was always Democratic leaning as far as that state is concerned. This said, Colorado has 9 of the 270 electoral votes that are required to win the presidency. Biden did win the state by more than 13 percentage points in the 2020 elections. What is going to be happening as far as the 2024 elections are concerned? Do you feel this might have some leaning as far as Colorado is concerned, or even beyond Colorado, in your point of view?
Look, the truth is that the district court, the lower court, didn't uphold this case. The district court felt that Trump engaged in insurrection, which I think is wrong, but the court said the president's not mentioned in the Constitution. It's the senators, the representatives, the vice president, everybody you name it, but no president. And I think if you're going to read the text, you're going to understand the reason for this, which had to do with the Civil War and the fight between the North.
All right, Mark, we have to go to a short break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom, and we're discussing the disqualification of Donald Trump from the Colorado ruling court. In fact, that has justified based on the January 6th incident that happened. Now, we've been rejoined by Mark Meirowitz. He's a political analyst. Mark, we were discussing about the Trump's disqualification. What I'd like to understand also from your perspective is, what is the status as far as the other disqualification cases of Donald Trump is concerned? Because as far as what I have read and heard, voters and advocacy groups have sued to block Trump from the ballot in more than 12 states, but at least 7 of them have failed for a variety of reasons. What happens to the 5 that have not failed as of yet?
Well, I think in thinking about it some more, because of your great question, it seems to me the Supreme Court will probably maybe take the case, because you can imagine the havoc that's going to be created here if a number of states follow the Colorado Supreme Court and try to kick Trump off the ballot. Besides the legal confusion of appealing in many states to Supreme Court, can you imagine, as we are approaching the election in November 2024, where you'll have a whole group of these cases trying to kick Trump off the ballot? And by the way, in Colorado, the judges on the Supreme Court, as far as I have read, were all appointed by Democrats. Now, interestingly enough, even so, it was a split decision 4-3, because this is a leap of faith. This provision has never been used in a state proceeding to disqualify a presidential candidate. So the Supreme Court is going to proceed very carefully on this. But you're correct in saying that the other cases are all pending. They were all looking to Colorado to see what they were going to do there. The trial court on a technical issue said he can stay on the ballot. The Supreme Court said that's wrong, because the Constitution, even though it doesn't mention the president, it talks about any office or other offices. So the Supreme Court in Colorado said, well, it includes the president. So that's already groundbreaking. The Colorado Supreme Court itself said that we are walking into uncharted territory. So I think the bottom line here is that we have chaos in our political system. Why? Because the people are entitled to vote for candidates who are selected by the political parties. This provision was meant to kick Trump off the primary ballot for the Republican Party, not necessarily the ballot for the general election, because he's not yet the official candidate. So if they're trying to purge him from the political system, his lawyers say, well, that's not fair. This is a democracy. America does not allow proceedings to kick people out. Now, even arguably, if he had been convicted of insurrection, we don't even know the result. But in this case, he was never convicted. He was found to be an insurrectionist in the January 6th events. And as you pointed out, those were horrific events for American democracy. Nevertheless, it is somebody who has been found to be engaged in insurrection or rebellion under the Constitution. Now, where was that ever found? In all the cases that have been brought against Trump, and those 6+ cases and the 91+ charges and all of this other stuff, there is, to my knowledge, no claim of a crime of rebellion or insurrection, because they can't prove it. They can't prove it because what Trump did on that day, albeit very, very bad, not good, not in the spirit of democracy, but what the standard is imminent incitement to violence, and that's the Supreme Court standard, and that has not been proved, nor has it been charged to my knowledge. So Trump's argument is, you know, it's an organized cabal trying to get me off the ballot to make sure I can't run. The result of every single indictment and the result of this is to push Trump's numbers up. His popularity numbers are up and up each time these proceedings are brought. So we have a wild and crazy, to use a term, political system. And on the other side, we've got this going on Trump in Colorado. And then we've got possible impeachment of Biden on the other side. So how are the American people supposed to calmly and quietly ponder their candidates and choose a candidate for the arguably one of the most important positions in the world, President of the United States, if we clutter the scene with these legal proceedings, which many legal scholars believe that this proceeding has no merit. Now, I'm not saying it does or doesn't. As a lawyer myself, what the Supreme Court says is the rule of law, and I follow that, obviously. But I don't necessarily have a follow the Colorado Supreme Court, because they're just uncharted. They're making the law. All right. Which is the question of whether
territory, Mark, if I understand well, they've entered uncharted territory, but will it set a precedent? That is also a huge question mark. Noah Bookbinder, I'll just end this by saying that Noah Bookbinder of the campaign group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, which did bring in the original case, took to social media and called it a huge moment of democracy, saying it is not only historic and justified, but also necessary to protect the future of democracy in our country. This is what they said. What happens in the next days is something that we will all wait and see. Thank you very much, Mark Meirowitz, political analyst, who have joined us, to have talked to us about this very important decision that has been taken by the Colorado Supreme Court. Finally, let's come to the last story, that is the International Human Solidarity Day that is being observed across the world and in Pakistan as well. The theme this year is Advocate for Change. We all know what is happening in the illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. We all know what is happening in Palestine as well. The fact remains that so many issues that confront humanity are being witnessed by all of us across the world. And when we talk of advocacy for change, I think the advocacy needs to come from the powers that be and needs to trickle down, so that there could be a proper change when it comes to issues that confront the world and issues that plague the people of the world. That is what International Human Solidarity Day is all about. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with news story segments that pertain to us, you in Pakistan. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.